The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Durango as Luke Carter made his way through town, his Wells Fargo badge catching occasional glints of light beneath his worn leather vest. 3 stagecoach robberies in as many months had the company demanding answers, and as their lead detective in the Colorado Territory, those answers fell squarely on his shoulders. His boots clicked against the wooden sidewalk as he approached the local office, mind churning over the peculiar pattern emerging in these heists. Nathan Hall, his partner of 5 years, was already inside poring over maps spread across their shared desk. The office smelled of coffee and old paper, with wanted posters plastering the walls and a pot-bellied stove in the corner that had seen better days. "Luke?" Nathan nodded without looking up, his finger tracing a route between Durango and Pueblo. "I think I might have something here about the timing of these robberies." The peculiarity that gnawed at Luke was how the bandits seemed to know exactly which coaches carried the valuable shipments. Wells Fargo prided itself on discretion, with only a handful of people privy to cargo manifests. He'd known Nathan since their days chasing rustlers along the border with Isaac Lopez, now Marshal over in Tucson. The three of them had built solid reputations as honest lawmen in a territory where such men were rare as desert rain. Luke settled into his chair, studying his partner's face in the fading light. Nathan had been distracted lately, making frequent trips to the telegraph office and disappearing for days at a time. He claimed to be following leads, but something about his behavior raised Luke's instincts. Still, Nathan had never given him reason to doubt before, and Luke pushed the unsettling thoughts aside. "What have you found?" he asked, leaning forward to examine the map. "The robberies all happened within 2 days of a full moon," Nathan explained, his voice carrying the slight tremor it got when he was onto something. "And always along this stretch here, between Devil's Canyon and the old Lopez Ranch." He traced the route with his finger, and Luke noticed a slight trembling in his hand. The gang has to be getting their information from someone inside the company. There's no other explanation. The sound of horses outside drew their attention. Through the window, Luke spotted Caleb Nelson, their junior agent, dismounting from his horse. The young man's clothes were trail-worn, his face etched with exhaustion from his latest reconnaissance mission, tracking the robbers' possible hideouts. Luke had sent him to scout the canyons north of town, hoping to find some trace of the gang's whereabouts. "Gentlemen," Caleb said as he entered, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow, "found something interesting up in Rattlesnake Gulch. Fresh campsite, couldn't be more than a day old. And this?" He placed a torn piece of paper on the desk. A partial manifest from one of the robbed coaches, the Wells Fargo letterhead clearly visible at the top. Luke's eyes narrowed as he recognized the handwriting on the document. The manifest was written in Nathan's distinctive scrawl, but this copy showed signs of being deliberately torn, not the kind of damage you'd expect from a document dropped during a robbery. Luke kept his face neutral as he examined it, his mind racing. Nathan had been responsible for preparing the manifests for the past several shipments, including all 3 that had been hit. The coincidence was too perfect to ignore. A knock at the door interrupted Luke's thoughts. Eleanor Carter, his wife of 15 years, stood in the doorway with a concerned expression. "Luke, there's a telegram for Nathan," she said, holding out the yellow paper. "The operator said it was marked urgent." Luke watched as Nathan snatched the telegram with unusual haste, his face paling slightly as he read its contents. Without a word, his partner crumpled the paper and shoved it into his pocket. The pieces were starting to form a troubling picture in Luke's mind. Nathan's recent behavior, the precise timing of the robberies, the manifest in his handwriting, and now this secretive telegram. But Luke had learned long ago that in the territories, things were rarely as simple as they appeared. Nathan was more than just a partner. He was family, a man who had stood beside him through countless dangers. If he was involved, there had to be a reason. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the office in purple shadows, Luke made a decision. He would investigate quietly, gather evidence before confronting his friend. If Nathan was indeed feeding information to the robbers, Luke needed to understand why a man with an unblemished 20-year career would suddenly turn against everything he believed in. The answer, he suspected, lay in those mysterious telegrams and Nathan's increasingly frequent trips back east. The following morning, Luke traced his finger along the stagecoach route map spread across his desk, marking each robbery location with a red dot. The pattern was unmistakable. Every hit occurred within 50 miles of a Wells Fargo station, where Nathan had recently inspected manifests. The realization made his stomach turn. 20 years of trust and brotherhood weren't easily dismissed, but the evidence was mounting like storm clouds over the desert. Outside his window, Tucson stirred to life as merchants opened their shops and ranch hands led supply wagons through the dusty streets. Luke watched a group of Mexican traders setting up their market stalls, their animated conversations drifting up to his second-floor office. The normalcy of the scene stood in stark contrast to the turmoil in his mind. He needed more information, and he knew exactly where to start. Making his way down to the telegraph office, Luke nodded to Isaac, the aging operator who'd worked the wire for as long as anyone could remember. "Need to send a message to Durango," Luke said, sliding a carefully worded inquiry across the desk. The telegram requested information about any recent medical facilities or doctors treating patients from the territories. If Nathan's wife was ill, as Luke suspected, there would be records. While waiting for a response, Luke visited the Wells Fargo station where Charlotte, their record keeper, was organizing the week's manifests. "Mind if I look through last month's schedules?" he asked casually. Charlotte's steel-gray hair was pulled back severely, matching her no-nonsense demeanor, but her eyes softened at Luke's request. She'd always had a soft spot for the detective who treated her with genuine respect. As Luke pored over the documents, a pattern emerged. Nathan's inspection routes had changed subtly over the past 6 months, concentrating around specific corridors where the terrain favored ambush. The robberies followed his path like shadows, never more than 3 days after his visits. The evidence was circumstantial, but damning. Luke carefully copied the dates and locations into his notebook, his hand heavy with the weight of betrayal. Late afternoon brought Isaac's runner with a response from Durango. Luke's heart sank as he read the message. A prestigious medical facility there had indeed been treating Eleanor, Nathan's wife, for a rare condition requiring expensive experimental treatments. The costs were listed, astronomical sums that no lawman's salary could hope to cover. The final piece clicked into place with the hollow finality of a coffin nail. That evening, as Luke sat in his favorite chair at the Tucson Saloon, nursing a whiskey he barely tasted, he noticed Caleb, one of the stagecoach drivers, drinking heavily at the bar. The man's face was lined with fear and exhaustion. He'd survived 2 robberies in the past month. Luke watched as Caleb's shoulders slumped under the burden of knowing each journey could be his last. These weren't just numbers on a manifest. Real people were suffering because of Nathan's choices. Through the saloon's grimy windows, Luke could see the last rays of sunlight painting the distant mountains in shades of blood and gold. Tomorrow, Nathan would return from his latest inspection route, and Luke would have to decide how to handle what he knew. The law demanded justice, but 20 years of friendship demanded understanding. Between those competing loyalties lay a choice that would haunt him either way. As he contemplated his options, Luke recalled something Nathan had once said during a particularly difficult case. "Sometimes the right thing and the legal thing ain't the same." At the time, it had seemed like simple wisdom. Now those words carried the weight of prophecy. The sun finally disappeared behind the mountains, leaving Luke alone in the growing darkness with his troubled thoughts and the knowledge that tomorrow would force his hand one way or another. The next morning arrived with a merciless desert sun that seemed to mock Luke's sleepless night. He'd spent hours at his desk in the Wells Fargo office, reviewing manifests and cross-referencing dates. Each notation in Nathan's precise handwriting now felt like an accusation, a record of betrayal written in ink and guilt. The pattern was undeniable. Every coach that had been hit had been inspected by Nathan just days before. Through the office window, Luke watched as Durango's main street came to life. Joshua, the local blacksmith, was already at work, the rhythmic clanging of his hammer providing an oddly comforting counterpoint to Luke's troubled thoughts. A group of Mexican traders led their mules toward the marketplace, their quiet conversations in Spanish drifting through the morning air. Everything seemed normal, but nothing would ever be normal again. Luke pulled out the telegram he'd received from Eleanor, Nathan's wife, 3 days ago. Her gratitude for Nathan's dedication to providing for her treatment leaked through every carefully chosen word. She had no idea the money keeping her alive was stained with the blood of honest men. Luke thought of young Isaac, the guard who'd taken a bullet during the last robbery. He'd survived, but his right arm would never work properly again. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Luke's attention. Through the window, he spotted Nathan riding into town, his coat dusty from the trail. Luke Carter stared at the scattered papers across his desk, in the Wells Fargo office in Durango, his weathered fingers tracing the pattern of recent stagecoach robberies. Something didn't add up. The bandits were hitting only the most valuable shipments with uncanny precision, leaving the regular mail runs untouched. After 15 years as the company's most trusted detective, his instincts told him this was an inside job. His partner Nathan Hall burst through the door, bringing with him the crisp autumn air and news of another robbery attempt near the Pueblo border. 3 men, all masked, knew exactly which strongbox to grab, Nathan reported, removing his hat and running fingers through graying hair. Luke noticed his partner's hands trembling slightly as he set down his saddlebags, but attributed it to the morning's chill. The territorial boundaries between Colorado and New Mexico had become increasingly lawless, with gangs exploiting the jurisdictional confusion to evade capture. But these robberies were different. Too precise, too calculated. Luke pulled out his map, marking the latest incident with a red pin. The pattern formed an irregular circle around Durango, each strike occurring just beyond the reach of local law enforcement. Charlotte Lopez, the office manager, brought in a fresh pot of coffee and the latest Telegraph reports. Her dark eyes lingered on Nathan's haggard face before she quietly withdrew. Luke had noticed the subtle exchanges between them lately, meaningful glances and hushed conversations that ceased when he approached. Something was brewing beneath the surface of their usual professional rapport. The investigation led Luke to interview Eleanor Nelson, who ran the general store across from the Wells Fargo office. She mentioned seeing riders leaving town late at night, always heading south toward the territorial border. More telling was her observation that these mysterious departures often coincided with the arrival of certain telegraph messages at the office. Luke spent hours poring over shipping manifests and employee records, looking for any connection between the office staff and the robberies. The thieves' knowledge was too specific. They knew not only which coaches carried valuable cargo, but also the exact times and routes. Only someone with access to the company's most sensitive information could be feeding them details. Nathan's behavior grew increasingly erratic as the investigation progressed. He began taking frequent trips to Tucson, claiming to follow leads, but returning empty-handed and more agitated than before. Luke discovered crumpled telegraph receipts in Nathan's wastebasket, addressed to a doctor in Wichita. The pieces were starting to form a disturbing picture. One evening, Luke followed his partner to a remote canyon outside Durango. Hidden behind a boulder, he watched as Nathan met with 3 rough-looking men, passing them what appeared to be documents. The betrayal cut deep, but something held Luke back from drawing his weapon. There had to be more to the story than simple greed. Through careful questioning of Charlotte, Luke learned that Nathan's wife Caroline had been quietly fighting a devastating illness in Wichita. The expensive treatments were far beyond a lawman's salary, and insurance wouldn't cover experimental procedures. Nathan had been selling information to the gang, using his cut of the robberies to keep his wife alive. The moral complexity of the situation weighed heavily on Luke. His partner of 8 years was technically a criminal, but his motives were born of desperation and love rather than greed. The law was clear, but the right course of action was anything but. Luke found himself torn between duty and loyalty, justice and mercy. Isaac Allen, the local banker, had been pressing for arrests in the robbery cases, threatening to withdraw the bank's business from Wells Fargo. The pressure mounted as more influential citizens demanded results, while Luke quietly gathered evidence that would either save or condemn his partner. Joshua Carter, Luke's younger brother and the town doctor, provided unexpected insight when he revealed that Caroline Hall had written to him seeking medical advice months ago. Her condition was terminal, and the expensive treatments in Wichita were only prolonging the inevitable. Nathan was sacrificing everything, including his honor, for a losing battle. The situation came to a head when Luke intercepted a telegraph warning Nathan that Caroline had taken a turn for the worse. His partner was planning one final heist, a large gold shipment that would fund a last-ditch experimental treatment. Luke knew he had to act before Nathan crossed a line from which there would be no return. Josephine Carter, Luke's wife, urged him to find a way to help Nathan rather than arrest him. "Sometimes the law isn't enough," she said, reminding him of their own struggles when Joshua had nearly died of fever as a child. "Sometimes love demands more than justice." Her words echoed in his mind as he formulated a plan. Rose Allen, the banker's wife and a prominent member of the Ladies' Aid Society, became an unexpected ally when Luke carefully explained the situation. She helped organize a secret collection among the town's wealthy families, raising funds for Caroline's treatment through legitimate means. It wouldn't save her life, but it might save Nathan's soul. The complexity of land disputes and property rights along the territorial borders had created a gray area that Luke could use to his advantage. By carefully documenting the robberies as occurring in disputed jurisdictions, he could blur the lines of authority and buy time to resolve the situation without destroying his partner's life. The Territorial Marshal's office in Durango became Luke's temporary headquarters as he carefully constructed his plan. The adobe building's cool interior provided refuge from both the scorching sun and his growing moral conflict. Maps scattered across his desk showed the complex patchwork of jurisdictional boundaries, each one representing a possible loophole that could help Nathan avoid the hangman's noose. Isaac, the seasoned telegraph operator in Pueblo, had become an unwitting part of Luke's scheme. Each time Nathan transmitted information about valuable shipments, Isaac now sent coded messages to Luke, allowing him to track the pattern without alerting his partner. The old operator's weathered hands moved precisely across the telegraph key, never suspecting he was helping to both expose and potentially save a fellow lawman. The dusty trail between Tucson and Wichita had become a chessboard where Luke carefully positioned his pieces. He arranged for certain coaches to carry decoy shipments, testing his theory about the information leaks while protecting the genuine cargo. The strategy required delicate coordination with Wells Fargo's offices, made possible only by his sterling reputation within the company. Rose Allen's influence proved invaluable as she discreetly approached potential donors among the territory's wealthy ranchers and merchants. Her social connections opened doors that would have remained firmly closed to a mere lawman. Each contribution to Caroline's medical fund represented another thread in the safety net Luke was weaving for his troubled friend. Eleanor's words about love and justice continued to shape Luke's actions, but pragmatic concerns demanded attention. He knew the outlaw gang receiving Nathan's information wouldn't simply disappear when the leak stopped. Their leader, a ruthless man known only as Caleb, had already demonstrated his willingness to kill anyone who threatened his operation. The situation grew more complex when Charlotte, the young widow who ran the Durango boarding house, recognized one of Caleb's men from her previous life in Wichita. Her information suggested the gang's influence extended far beyond simple robbery, reaching into the highest levels of territorial politics. Luke realized he wasn't just fighting to save Nathan. He was uncovering a conspiracy that threatened the entire region's stability. Josephine, the sharp-eyed stagecoach driver who had survived 3 attempted robberies, became Luke's eyes on the trail. Her regular reports about suspicious activities and unusual travelers helped him piece together the gang's movement patterns. More importantly, she provided confirmation that Nathan's information was still being used, though less frequently as Luke's security measures took effect. The moral weight of his decisions pressed heavily on Luke as he watched his partner struggle to maintain his facade of normalcy. Nathan's face had grown gaunt, his eyes haunted by the knowledge that each piece of information he sold might lead to someone's death. The letters from Caroline, filled with hope about her improving condition, only deepened the visible lines of guilt etched across his features. Joshua, now grown and working as Luke's deputy, unknowingly contributed to his father's plan by maintaining detailed records of every coach robbery. His methodical documentation provided the foundation for Luke's jurisdictional strategy, though the young man's strict sense of justice would have been troubled by his father's deliberate manipulation of the law. As summer heat gave way to autumn winds, Luke's careful preparation began yielding results. The legitimate fund for Caroline's treatment had grown substantial enough to offer real hope, while his strategic positioning of law enforcement resources gradually restricted the gang's operating territory. Yet he knew the final confrontation with Caleb's organization loomed inevitable as storm clouds on the horizon. The complexity of the situation reached new levels when Rose discovered that certain charitable contributions to Caroline's fund appeared to be coming from the same sources as the gang's blood money. The territorial banking system had become an intricate web of legitimate and illegitimate transactions, all carefully designed to obscure their true nature. Luke realized that saving Nathan would require unraveling this entire network without triggering its collapse. Luke Allen's boots echoed through the empty streets of Durango as dawn painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. 3 weeks of investigating the stagecoach robberies had led him here, to this moment. His partner Nathan Hall's strange behavior lately, the hesitation in his voice during their discussions, the way he'd redirect conversations about certain coaches. It all made a terrible kind of sense now. The ledger Luke had discovered hidden in Nathan's desk told a damning story in cold, precise numbers. The autumn wind carried the scent of wood smoke and impending snow as Luke made his way toward the Wells Fargo office. His stomach churned at what he had to do next. Nathan wasn't just his partner. They'd worked together for 8 years, saved each other's lives more times than he could count. But the evidence was irrefutable. Nathan had been selling information about valuable shipments to the Lopez gang, who'd been terrorizing the coaches between Durango and Pueblo for months. Inside the office, Nathan was already at his desk, reviewing reports with the same methodical focus he always showed. He looked up and smiled warmly at Luke's entrance, and for a moment, Luke almost doubted what he knew to be true. But then he noticed the slight tremor in Nathan's hands, the dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Morning, Luke. Any progress on the Lopez case?" Nathan's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it that Luke had never noticed before. "You could say that." Luke's hand rested on his holstered revolver as he closed the office door behind him. "I know about Eleanor, Nathan. About the doctors in Wichita, the experimental treatments." Nathan's face drained of color, his shoulders slumping as the weight of discovery pressed down on him. "How long did you think you could keep selling route information before someone figured it out?" "She's dying, Luke." Nathan's whisper filled the small office like a thunderclap. "The treatments. They're working, but they cost more than I'll make in 10 years with Wells Fargo. I tried everything else first. Sold our house, our cattle, even Eleanor's mother's jewelry. But it wasn't enough." Tears gleamed in his eyes as he looked up at his partner. "What would you have done? If it was Caroline?" Luke's grip tightened on his revolver. He'd asked himself that same question 100 times since finding the ledger. If it was his Caroline lying in that hospital bed in Wichita instead of Eleanor, wouldn't he move heaven and earth to save her? "The Lopez gang killed Joshua Carter last month. Shot him dead protecting that payroll shipment. He had a wife too, Nathan. A baby on the way." Nathan stood slowly, his hands spread wide on the desk. "I never meant for anyone to die. I told them. I made them swear they wouldn't hurt anyone. Just take the money and go." His voice cracked. "I have to save her, Luke. She's everything to me. Everything." Outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, drifting past the office window like ash. "There's a coach coming through tomorrow." Luke's words fell like stones in the quiet room. "Carrying Army payroll to Fort Pueblo. The Lopez gang knows about it, don't they?" Nathan's silence was answer enough. "I can't let that happen again. You know I can't." His fingers wrapped around the grip of his revolver, but he couldn't bring himself to draw it. "Not yet." "Then help me." Nathan's eyes blazed with desperate hope. "One last job. Enough money to finish Eleanor's treatments. Then I'll turn myself in, face whatever punishment comes. But I have to know she'll live first. Please, Luke. You're not just my partner. You're my brother in everything but blood." The weight of the choice pressed down on Luke like a physical thing. His duty, his badge, the oath he'd sworn to protect, they all demanded one course of action. But the memory of Nathan carrying him 3 miles through Apache territory with a bullet in his leg, of standing as best man at his wedding to Eleanor, of 1,000 shared meals and jokes and dangers, they pulled him in another direction entirely. A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. "Mr. Allen? Mr. Hall?" It was Isaac Nelson, the bank manager. "The Army escort for tomorrow's shipment is here to discuss the route." Luke and Nathan locked eyes across the desk, the moment of decision crystallizing between them like the frost forming on the window panes. "Whatever you're going to do, you better do it now." Nathan's hand moved slowly toward the drawer where Luke knew he kept his own revolver. "I won't stop trying to save her, Luke. I can't." The morning sun caught the silver of Luke's badge, throwing shadows across the wall like bars of a prison cell. Luke's decision came with the clarity of a gunshot. He drew his revolver in one smooth motion, but instead of aiming it at Nathan, he turned and locked the office door. "We've got 10 minutes before Isaac gets suspicious," he said quietly. "Tell me everything about your deal with the Lopez gang. If we're going to fix this, We need a better plan than you getting yourself killed or arrested. Nathan's shoulders slumped as he pulled a folded map from his vest pocket, spreading it across the desk with trembling fingers. The Lopez gang has a man in Durango who watches the bank shipment schedules. I've been marking the high-value routes for them. Anything over 10,000. The morning light caught the exhaustion etched in his face as he traced the dotted lines between towns with a weathered finger. Luke studied the map intently, his mind racing through possibilities as he holstered his revolver. The familiar territory lines blurred into new patterns as he considered angles he'd never seen before. Caroline's treatments. How much more do you need? He asked, his voice low and controlled. Nathan's eyes clouded with pain as he whispered, 3,000. The doctor in Wichita says it's her last chance. The floorboards outside creaked as someone passed the door, making both men tense. Luke moved closer to the window, watching dust devils dance across the street while he pieced together a plan. The Army escort. They're here for the Pueblo shipment tomorrow. 20,000 in banknotes. He turned to face his partner, seeing both desperation and hope warring in Nathan's expression. I can get word to Lopez's men through the usual channels, Nathan offered hesitantly, but Luke shook his head. Number. We're going to run this my way. Clean, but we'll need help. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Remember Joshua from the Tucson office? He owes me for that business with his brother last spring, and he's discreet. The next hour passed in intense whispers as they laid out the details. Luke's plan was audacious but careful. A false robbery that would let them capture the Lopez gang while securing the funds Nathan needed through legal means. The Army escort would be their unwitting allies, and Joshua would ensure the paperwork disappeared into the labyrinth of Wells Fargo bureaucracy. Isaac's voice carried through the door again, more insistent this time. Gentlemen, the lieutenant is waiting. Luke gathered the maps and documents, tucking them securely inside his coat. Last chance to back out, he told Nathan quietly. His partner straightened his spine, determination replacing the guilt in his eyes. I'm in, for Caroline. The meeting with the Army escort passed in a blur of tactical discussions and route planning. Luke watched Nathan play his part perfectly, suggesting the very ambush points they'd just marked for their own use. The lieutenant, a young man fresh from back east, eagerly accepted their experienced guidance, never suspecting the elaborate trap being laid. As sunset painted the western sky in fierce oranges and reds, Luke rode toward the telegraph office. His message to Joshua would set everything in motion, a complex dance of loyalty, deception, and redemption. The weight of his badge felt different now, heavier, with the knowledge that sometimes justice wore unexpected faces. Tomorrow would test not just their plan, but the very foundations of their friendship. Behind him, Nathan headed home to write what might be his final letter to Caroline. He would tell her nothing of the danger, only that he loved her and that soon, very soon, everything would be better. The desert wind carried dust and promises across the darkening landscape, while somewhere in the distance, the Lopez gang prepared for what they thought would be their biggest score yet. In his room that night, Luke cleaned his revolver with methodical precision, each movement a meditation on the choices that had brought them here. The silver star on his desk caught the lamplight, reminding him of all it represented: law, order, justice. Tomorrow, he would risk everything to prove that sometimes the spirit of those ideals mattered more than their letter. As he loaded the chambers one by one, he prayed they would all live long enough to find out if he was right. Dawn crept across the desert like spilled whiskey, slow and amber. Luke positioned himself behind a cluster of sun-bleached rocks overlooking the canyon pass, his trusted Winchester cradled in his arms. The Lopez gang would come through here. They always did after a big score. But this time, the cargo they thought they were chasing was bait in an elaborate trap. What troubled Luke most wasn't the dangerous men he was about to face, but the knowledge that his friend's betrayal would soon be exposed to the harsh light of day. Nathan arrived right on schedule, taking his position on the opposite ridge. Even from this distance, Luke could see the tension in his partner's shoulders, the way he kept adjusting his collar, as if it were suddenly too tight. How many times had they done this dance before? But today, the steps were different. Luke had made sure the Wells Fargo office sent out word of a special shipment, gold from the Pueblo mines bound for Tucson. He knew Nathan couldn't resist passing that information along. The morning stretched on, heat rising in shimmering waves from the rocky ground. Luke thought about Caroline, Nathan's wife, fighting her battle against consumption in a sanitarium back east. He'd visited her once, seen the determination in her eyes, even as her body wasted away. Perhaps in Nathan's position, he would have made the same choice. Luke Hall stood in the dusty street of Durango as the morning sun cast long shadows between the buildings. His hands trembled slightly as he held the damning evidence, a series of coded telegraph messages between his partner Nathan Carter and the notorious Lopez gang. After 6 months of investigating the stagecoach robberies, the truth had hit him like a physical blow. His own friend and fellow Wells Fargo detective had been the inside man all along. The pieces had finally come together when Luke traced a series of wire transfers heading east to a hospital in Boston. Nathan's wife Caroline was there, fighting a losing battle with consumption. The treatments were experimental and astronomically expensive, far beyond what a detective's salary could cover. Luke understood the desperate measures a man might take for love, but this betrayal cut deep. As he made his way to the Wells Fargo office, Luke's mind raced through his options. By all rights, he should arrest Nathan immediately. But their friendship of 15 years gave him pause. They'd ridden together, fought together, saved each other's lives more times than he could count. The weight of the badge on his chest had never felt heavier. Nathan was already at his desk when Luke entered, poring over reports with his usual methodical attention to detail. For a moment, Luke just watched him. This man he'd trusted with his life, now revealed as the architect of the very crimes they were supposed to be solving. When Nathan looked up and smiled in greeting, Luke felt sick to his stomach. "We need to talk," Luke said quietly, closing the office door behind him. "Somewhere private." Nathan's expression didn't change, but Luke caught the slight tensing of his shoulders. They walked in silence to the small stable behind the office, where they often discussed sensitive cases. The familiar smell of hay and leather somehow made this moment even more surreal. "I know about Caroline," Luke said simply, laying the telegrams on a hay bale between them. "I know about the hospital bills, the arrangements with Lopez, all of it." Nathan's face went ashen, but he didn't deny it. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft nickering of horses in their stalls. "She's dying, Luke," Nathan finally said, his voice raw. "The doctors say this new treatment might be her only chance, but it costs more than I'll make in 10 years. What was I supposed to do? Watch her waste away when I could save her?" His hands were shaking as he gripped the edge of a wooden beam. Luke's response was cut short by the sudden thunder of hoofbeats approaching. Through the stable door he saw Isaac Lopez and his gang riding hard into town, guns drawn. Nathan's face twisted with horror. "No, they weren't supposed to come here. I told them the arrangement was finished." "Looks like your partners had other ideas," Luke said grimly, drawing his revolver. "How many men?" Nathan was already moving, positioning himself behind a support post. "Usually 8 or 9. They'll have the building surrounded by now." His voice was steady despite everything, the instincts of 15 years working together taking over. The next few minutes were chaos, as bullets splintered wood and gun smoke filled the air. Luke and Nathan fought back to back, just as they had countless times before. But this time, every shot carried the weight of betrayal and impossible choices. When Isaac Lopez himself burst through the door, Nathan stepped directly into his line of fire, shielding Luke. The bullet took Nathan high in the chest. As Luke caught his falling partner, Lopez's second shot went wide. Luke's return fire caught the bandit leader between the eyes. The remaining gang members scattered, leaving their dead boss behind. Nathan's blood was already soaking through his shirt as Luke tried desperately to stem the flow. "Get word to Caroline," Nathan gasped, gripping Luke's arm. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't." He never finished the sentence. Luke held his friend's body as the light faded from his eyes, while outside the sheriff's posse finally arrived, far too late to make any difference. The weight of grief and guilt threatened to crush him. In the end, Luke sent all of Nathan's remaining money to Caroline, along with a letter explaining everything. He couldn't bring himself to tell her the whole truth. Let her remember Nathan as the good man he'd been before desperation drove him to betrayal. The official report listed Nathan Carter as killed in the line of duty, dying a hero's death defending his partner. Years later, Luke would sometimes visit Nathan's grave on the hill overlooking Durango. He'd pour 2 glasses of whiskey and remember the complexity of friendship, love, and loyalty. The badge still weighed heavy, but he'd learned that justice wasn't always as simple as right and wrong. Sometimes good men made terrible choices for the right reasons, and living with those choices was punishment enough. The years rolled by like tumbleweeds across the border territory, but Luke never forgot the weight of that fateful day. He continued his work for Wells Fargo, though he requested transfers that kept him moving between Tucson and Pueblo, never staying too long in one place. The ghost of Nathan's betrayal and sacrifice haunted every stagecoach he investigated, every robbery he solved. He became known as a relentless detective, but few understood the personal demons that drove him. One spring morning in 1878, a letter arrived from Caroline. She'd finally learned the full truth about Nathan from an old gang member who'd sought redemption before dying. Instead of condemnation, her words spoke of forgiveness and understanding. She wrote of how Nathan's blood money had indeed saved her life, allowing her to receive treatment from specialists in Boston. She was now teaching at a small school in Wichita, helping other families in need. The letter sparked something in Luke he thought long buried. He began using his connections to establish a fund for Wells Fargo employees facing medical hardships, ensuring no other agent would face Nathan's impossible choice. The company's board initially resisted, but Luke's reputation and passionate advocacy eventually won them over. They named it the Carter Memorial Fund, though few knew the true story behind the name. Eleanor, a young widow who ran the telegraph office in Durango, caught Luke's eye during his frequent visits to Nathan's grave. She had her own history of loss, having lost her husband to Apache raiders near the border. They began sharing quiet dinners, neither pushing too hard, both understanding how grief could reshape a person's heart. She never asked why he brought 2 glasses to the cemetery, and he loved her more for that silence. Luke's investigation methods evolved too. Where once he saw only black and white, he now sought to understand the desperate circumstances that drove men to crime. He became known for offering second chances when warranted, though his gun remained quick when mercy wasn't an option. The younger agents called him Old Testament Luke, harsh but just, always weighing the full measure of a man's soul. In 1880, he tracked a series of robberies to a former doctor-turned-bandit, stealing to fund a free clinic in Pueblo's poorest quarter. Instead of arresting him, Luke worked with the company to establish legitimate funding. He couldn't save Nathan, but he could honor his memory by finding better solutions to desperate situations. The clinic still stands today, bearing no name but saving countless lives. Charlotte, Nathan's daughter, whom Luke had never met, sought him out in 1885. Now a grown woman, with her mother's eyes and her father's determination, she wanted to understand the man who'd raised her on borrowed time. Over a bottle of her father's favorite whiskey, Luke finally shared the whole story: the pain, the loyalty, the impossible choices. They cried together for what was lost and what was saved. The border territory slowly yielded to civilization, but Luke remained its conscience and memory. He married Eleanor in a small ceremony on the hill where Nathan rested, the autumn wind carrying the scent of sage and promise. Together they built a life that honored the past while embracing the future, teaching their children that the greatest heroes often carried the heaviest burdens in silence. In his final years, Luke would sit on his porch overlooking Durango, Eleanor's hand in his, watching the sunset paint the hills gold. He'd achieved a peace that came from understanding that justice and mercy weren't opposing forces, but different faces of the same truth. Nathan's sacrifice had taught him that lesson, written in blood and loyalty across the years. When Luke finally joined his old friend in 1902, they buried him beside Nathan on the hill. Eleanor continued their work with the fund, and Charlotte's own daughter became a doctor, healing the wounds that greed and desperation once tore open. The legend of the Wells Fargo detective and his fallen partner faded into history, but their legacy lived on in every life touched by the mercy they'd learned at such great cost. The story of Luke and Nathan's fateful partnership echoed through the decades, carried forward by those who understood its deeper meaning. In 1920, Eleanor established the Nathan Mills Memorial Hospital in Durango, funded by the trust that had grown from those first desperate acts of mercy. The hospital specialized in treating those who couldn't afford care elsewhere, ensuring that no other family would face the impossible choices that had driven Nathan to his desperate measures. Charlotte's daughter, Rose, became the hospital's first chief of medicine, carrying forward both her mother's healing touch and the complicated legacy of her father's sacrifice. She kept Nathan's old badge in her office, a reminder that even the darkest choices could lead to light. Under her guidance, the hospital became known as a place where justice and compassion walked hand in hand. The old Wells Fargo building in Durango was preserved as a museum, its walls now telling stories not just of robberies and pursuit, but of the human heart's capacity for both betrayal and redemption.